Hi, this is my review of the Wild West Exodus 2-player starter box, Outlaws vs Lawmen. This box contains everything that you need to get started into Wild West Exodus. It comes with 2 complete forces for you to fight it out with a friend. Wild West Exodus is a skirmish Wild West battle game, but it can also be played with larger forces. Let's talk about the quality of the components. And just to let you know beforehand, I'm going to focus more on my experience with Wild West Exodus, that is with playing the game, and what I think of the miniatures and the way they are handling things, that is the company. But I won't focus too much on taking a look at each component separately. I'm just going to give you a general overview and a review and my thoughts on the entire thing. Well, first let's take a look at the box. Even though it's a bit flimsy, that is, it's thin cardstock, it holds together pretty well. If you are still looking for a better storage solution, you could provisionally keep your miniatures and templates and such inside this box. I've done that, and it's going to hold together quite a bit. You get 28 miniatures. Let me see if I can get that into focus. Sorry. You have 28 miniatures, 2 complete forces, which are the lawmen, the sheriffs and people who keep peace and order, and you have the outlaws that are a bit like scoundrels, but at the same time they also feel like they represent freedom. As we get into the different armies, you will see that there are different shades of gray. You also get these cool tokens that will help you mark different effects during the game, that is when you are taking cover or when you are using influence. I like them quite a bit because they look kind of like candy pieces of sorts. I really like how the plastic feels. Although the plastic it's somewhat hard, so you may actually need to perhaps use sandpaper or something to polish some sides that have like little pieces of squiggly lines and such. And this one looks like a sheriff star of sorts. The game also comes with 4 10-sided dice. They look really nice, and it comes with Ziploc bags, so that's pretty cool. I also like the pattern, the color of the dice. And you have these templates to measure distances, although I recommend that you use your measuring tape or stick. But here you have these templates with different measurements in inches. You even have to measure half an inch and such. You also have your cards for the different let me get them out of the bags. Let's see. With all the relevant information to keep track of things, with all the different stats, and those little circles right there, white circles, they serve to keep track of wounds or lifeblood of the miniatures. And I really like this template. This template is awesome. I don't understand why other companies haven't thought about this yet, but it's basically an all-in-one template of sorts. And it's basically to measure all the area of effect, attacks. So instead of having to carry around different circles and these blaster markers, you can use this thing for everything. You also have these diagrams to help you assemble the miniatures. although there are some errors because as you can see over here, those orange images there, they supposedly indicate which pieces are used to put together the miniature, but some of them are mistaken. So I recommend that you guide yourself by the letters and numbers here in this diagram rather than the colored areas. Now, before we take a look at the rulebook that comes with the box, and we take a look at the system, let's talk about the miniatures themselves. Oh, and I forgot to mention this one. This is really important. Bubble wrap. This it's great that they use this bubble wrap to protect the rulebook and cards and such from the plastic sprues. Because that way they show appreciation for the customer, that they want the miniatures and the different card and paper components to arrive safely, so that you don't have to the bother of calling or contacting via emailed companies, so that they give you replacements and such. So that's awesome. Games Workshop could learn from this. They don't include bubble wrap in some of their products. Let's take a look at the miniatures. Well, before that, I must say that I had a bit of a puzzling experience with them. First, I had a very negative opinion about them because I thought that the plastic was somewhat rubbery. It's not soft plastic. It's actually hard, but it had like a hint of rubberiness to it. So I thought, oh no, I don't know how this is going to turn out. And when I started separating the pieces from the sprues, they had, as I was telling you, those like little plastic squigglies that when you do not cut with your hobby knife skillfully, you need to remove those later on or use sandpaper or something. Because I was too used to the plastic used in Games Workshop that sometimes it's so easy to separate that you just have to snap it out of the sprue sometimes, and it comes out together almost quite clean. But I'm actually quite pleased that they use this type of plastic. I also, at first, because at the end result is quite good. At first I thought, oh no, and the features, they don't seem that they will hold together after using a primer on the miniature. And effectively, when I used the primer on it, it felt like the features were somewhat lessened or missing by the end result. But as I started painting the miniature and giving it a couple of layers of varnish, this is probably one of the best miniatures that I have in my collection. This is Jesse James, and let me see if I can get that into focus. And this actually looks really good. You cannot tell it because of the camera, but this is one of the best miniatures that I have, and it was quite a pleasure to paint the different features of the miniature. I actually love this miniature. Something that you have to be aware of is that these different miniatures are somewhat difficult to put together. Not so much, but because they are multi-part component miniatures, you have to use good quality glue and pay attention to the indications in the different diagrams, because otherwise things could end up a bit messy. The thing that I would consider a negative is that some of the bases are not really well, the miniature is kind of sticking out of the base, as you can see with this motorcycle type of miniature. The wheels are sticking out a bit. Let me see if I can, as you can see, so it kind of falls apart together. If you're not careful, you could perhaps carelessly with your finger unbalance the miniature and such. And the same thing happened with Jesse James, but I used good quality glue, and even though his foot is kind of like sticking out, it's held together quite well. And this is because there are different bases in Wild West Exodus that you can purchase separately, that have like small terrain features so that your miniature is a bit more stable. I'm going to put a link in the description below that takes you to the website so you can take a look at different miniatures and bases. And that's another thing that I think is a bit lacking, but this has more to do with, what would you say, the way that the miniatures are promoted. There aren't many painted examples in the website. You will expect to see many different color schemes and dioramas and such, but the website is a bit bare bones in that aspect. To my understanding, in the core rulebook, you have a lot of examples on how to paint the miniatures, but the website, it would be nice if it had those as well. And I also noticed that there isn't too much consistency between the different colors of the illustrations. For example, here you can see Jesse James has a bit of a green trench coat, sort of. And if you take a look at this illustration, his coat is more like a dark blue sort of color. You can also appreciate it a bit here. So there isn't like a clear way to paint your miniature unless you buy the core rulebook. Now let's talk about this mini rulebook. This is actually one of the best mini rulebooks that I've seen. Seriously, because if you compare it with the rulebook that comes with the former starter set of Hordes, that is Hordes MK2, that rulebook fell apart after a couple of flip-throughs, but this one is really sturdy and I used it quite a bit and it's held together magnificently. This is great, and it's great quality paper. It comes with some illustrations and photographs in black and white, and everything is generally well explained in the rulebook, although there are some typos and errors. And they have released a couple of frequently asked questions and errata, but in general it's a good rulebook. Now let's talk about the background of Wild West Exodus. This is a sort of like a science fantasy version of the old Wild West, and mixing together many famous historical characters like Abraham Lincoln, Wild Bill, Wyatt Earp, Jesse James, etc. It's mostly focused, of course, on the United States, but you do have some characters from Spain as well, and Mexico, and I think Atlantis as well. So, as I was telling you, it's like a science fantasy setting. And the plotline, I'm not too sure about it, and that is, I don't have too much information about it, because all of the background information comes with the core rulebook, and here they just give you like a bit of a glimpse, and you get the idea that there's this dark council manipulating things in the background, like creating conflict or using people as puppets in their games. And you also have this source of power known as RJ1027 that is used to power all the technology in Wild West Exodus. So at first the miniatures look a bit like steampunkish, as you could see from some of them. I still need to paint a lot of them, but they look a bit like steampunk technology, but they're actually powered by that particular RJ1027 power source. And here you have a little bit of information of the different factions, because for example there are the Enlightened, and they're kind of like the European faction, and they are brilliant scientists and that are looking for progress and technological advancement, but at the same time they have a bit like a Dr. Frankenstein vibe to them, because they take corpses and make sort of like robots out of them. They feel a bit like the villains in, like the struggles in Quake 2, to put it in a way. And you also have the Union, that they seek to unify the United States, but at the same time they are somewhat ruthless if you do not unite. And then you have the Warrior Nation. So they're the tribes that feel that like they are the protectors of humanity and nature, but at the same time they are obsessed with destroying technology. And then you have the Outlaws, and as I was telling you, all of those are like robbers, scoundrels. Let me see if I can get that into focus. And but they also represent freedom. And at the same time you have the in contrast you have the lawmen, who are there to protect the innocent, or at least the decent folk. but at the same time they are sometimes manipulated by other powers. So it's cool that each of the factions could be used in a heroic or perhaps villainous way. There are different ways to play as the good guys or the bad guys with different factions. And that's really nice. It has a real strong Wild West flavor to it. Because, for example, let's take Jesse James as an example. Jesse James, if you ask somebody who's more on the Confederate side of things, they're going to say that Jesse James was somewhat of a hero, like a Robin Hood. And if you ask someone who is more on the Union side of things, he's going to say that he was a bit of a villain and a trickster and such. But let me tell you a story that I heard that supposedly my great-grandmother used to tell, that there was this old woman that had little money, and she was in a dire situation because she didn't have enough money to pay her landowner, and she was asking for a little bit more time, and the landowner was quite stern and ruthless that she was going to lose her house if she didn't pay him. And Jesse James and his band of men by that time were traveling through that area, and they asked if she could let them spend the night in her house, and she told them about her troubles. And so Jesse James gave her a lot of money to pay the landowner. And then Jesse James and his men left the house, and the old woman paid the landowner. But check this out. Later on, the landowner was robbed by Jesse James, so he basically took his money back. He gave the old lady the money, and then when it got into the hands of the landowner, Jesse James took his money back. So that's I think that Jesse James was a little bit of both a villain and a hero, perhaps. Let's talk about the system of Wild West Exodus. This game is actually pretty fun. I think it works great at the skirmish level. It could get a bit too lengthy or repetitive if you play with a larger force, but there are some players that enjoy those types of games. But as a skirmish game, I thought it was really good. You obviously use your miniatures. They have a good arc of sight, so to speak. They can shoot pretty much anything in their line of sight, but for some specific situations, it's good to see their front arc. So it's better if you mark the arc in the base of the miniature. And you have as I was telling you, the profile cards that indicate the different stats and the amount of damage that they can take. And everything in this game is carried out by rolling 10-sided dice. To make, for example, an attack or a check to see if you can climb or jump or whatever, you roll your 10-sided die, and if you roll above a certain stat, you succeeded at a task. I'll get into more detail later on about that. You need a fairly large table. A 4x6 table would be nice, although I've played with in a 4x4 table and it works perfect. I think it also depends on the amount of models that you're going to field. But larger games could require bigger tables, of course, with more models. It's all up to you. Something that I did notice is that it's better if you do not use too many pieces of terrain, because terrain is quite vital, and some of the miniatures depend quite a bit on terrain. Because, for example, of the two forces included, the lawmen are quite solid. They have this ability, it was a forward echelon, and basically as long as they stick together they get a bonus to their defense or armor. And while the outlaws are a bit more mobile, so they are more to be used to take advantage of cover as soon as you can, and try to get around the lawmen. And if you have too many pieces of terrain, and that's not going to be as practical, because the lawmen are always going to get benefit not only because of their forward echelon, but because they're always going to have cover available. So basically you have your posse, your group of gunslingers, and depending on the scenario that you're going to play, you have to achieve different objectives, obtain victory points and such. Maybe you need to kill as many enemies as possible, or maybe you need to hold ground like King of the Hill, or maybe you need to get your forces from one side of the battlefield to the other. Here you have some pretty cool diagrams on how to set up the battlefield. And as I was telling you, if you play, for example, with half of that table. Also used half of the pieces of terrain for a more exciting and fair battle, in my opinion. Something that is also really cool is the influence pool. Influence is kind of like a combination of your luck and ability to plan of your character that allows you to reroll dice. And I think this is reflected quite well in the different characters, because, for example, Jesse James was supposed to be quite intelligent in his when he was planning train robberies and such, so he has a lot of influence, so it's quite nice. Well, in my opinion, when I use Jesse James, it's better to keep him safe so that you keep using influence, because if they kill Jesse James, well, you won't be able to use those influence points. Each turn you determine initiative to see who goes first, and then activations, and then the turn ends. Oh, and influence regenerates at the start of each initiative phase. You activate 1 to 3 miniatures, so it's quite tactical. Maybe you want to activate just 1 or 3, but it all depends if you want to see what your opponent is going to do first. But there is a way to activate more miniatures. You have this gang action, and you have different gangs of hired hands depending on your army. And you could activate between 5 to 10 of those, but they have to act as a unit simultaneously. You could also activate 1 to 3 models simultaneously, but they have to carry out the same actions, that is move and then attack and then move again and such. So that allows for a more smooth gameplay experience, so that you do not take too much time, especially if you field larger forces. It's going to flow a bit more smoothly, as I was telling you. And the characters feel really powerful. Many of them have several action points that allow them to carry out multiple actions per turn. And you could do things like move, climb, jump, go prone, aim, shoot, fight up close. And you have all the details, like for example, you have your range when you want to attack with the melee weapons. And of course, you can also attack at range. Obviously, this is a Wild West game. You can use guns and rifles and such, but you cannot pre-measure. You have to have a good sense of estimating inches, so to speak. And you have the details on how to cross terrain and even destroy it, opening doors or going through doors, windows, obstacles, jumping, climbing, dismounting, as I was telling you. And when you make an attack, you roll your 10-sided die, as I was telling you, and you try to roll above your the relevant stat. But for both melee and range, you have different stats for that. And your opponent has a chance to make a roll to see if he can dodge that attack. And you have things that will be like, for example, little hits are kind of like critical hits. And if you score a little hit, all of the damage goes through, even if your opponent is armored, because as I was telling you, this has a bit of a steampunk flavor to it. Many of the characters have metallic harnesses and such. A little hit goes through that armor, and the character is going to take severe damage. But you also have a similar thing when trying to dodge the attacks. You roll above a certain stat to see if you manage to dodge, and there is a sort of like a perfect dodge. I cannot find the specific name for it, but it's sort of like a perfect dodge, as I was telling you, and you avoid damage completely. Something that I noticed is that the vehicles used in the game are quite powerful, so I recommend that you include them in your force as often as you can. There are some limits as to how many vehicles and special miniatures you can include in your force, so you should take advantage of that when possible. And you have details on terrain, taking cover, obstacles. All of that modifies your capacity to score a hit. That's a life-saving dodge that I was telling you, to avoid damage altogether if you roll a natural 10. And then you have details of, for example, when you're fighting in melee, you cannot simply disengage. You could get attack from the back, like sort of like an attack of opportunity. You have details on throwing, pushing, and courage tests. And these characters are actually quite brave. They do not need to test courage unless they get hit by a really powerful weapon or with a special effect such as fire or blast. So that's actually quite nice. They won't be running away from the battlefield all the time. And then you have all the different details on weapons, special properties. because some weapons are kind of like incendiary weapons. Some of them can actually push your opponent away. Some of them are infected or poisoned. Some others that are the more powerful weapons are powered by the RJ1027 source of power that I was telling you, but there are some weapons that could actually disable those weapons, so it's also nice to have some weapons that aren't powered by this mysterious energy source. And you have information on using vehicles, light support and heavy support. When you damage a heavy support vehicle, you damage specific parts of that vehicle, and it adds a bit more realism to the fight. And you also have civilians. Some of them could be used as human shields, and some of them are also used as objectives. I think there's also a free downloadable scenario where they used civilians as objectives. And by the end of this rulebook, you have information on the scenarios and on campaign or narrative scenario gameplay. Although here you do not get the different narrative scenarios, you need to purchase the core rulebook for that. So let me tell you what I think overall of this two-player starter set for Wild West Exodus. I think this is a great starter set, and I really enjoy playing this game. This is a really fast and furious skirmish game. The first try, I think you're going to have to get used to some concepts. It probably took us about like 2 hours more or less the first time, because we were kind of like learning the game as we played, but later on it became a bit more smooth. It lasted like about an hour and a half, so I imagine that an expert player is going to probably to play an hour long game or so. I also like the different special abilities and powers, quite thematic of the different characters, because for example Wyatt Earp in the historical Wyatt Earp was quite famous because of the he used to use his enemies as human shields. He put his arm around the neck of someone and he used his shotgun like this. And the character, I'm trying to, I don't know if it, oh, here it is. The character has this shield, so you have a high armor value because you will be able to use that shield. Or Doc Holliday, as many of you know, he was quite sick, but he also had a very strong will to live and to kill. And so you have this character with a breather mask that is Doc Holliday, and he actually has the sort of like an immortality quality to him. That is, if he gets killed, he has this power known as 9 lives, and there is a chance that he will kind of like come back from the dead, or still keep fighting despite the damage, to put it in a way. And I also like that the two forces feel quite balanced. The lawmen feel more like we can take a lot of damage, our armor is too good, sort of feeling to them, while the outlaws, because of the influence of Jesse James, they rely a bit more on I would say attacking isolated forces of the lawmen with a lot of models, and then running back, sort of like a hit and run sort of thing. And as I was telling you, they are more mobile. And I like the balance. When the two forces interact, you do not feel like one has great advantage over the other. So, and the number of attacks, because as I was telling you, you have different action points that allow you to carry out several actions per turn. But for example, Jesse James, he uses 2 guns, and each of his guns shoots twice per action. So you're going to be like shooting 4 or 8 times, or depending on in a single turn. So it's quite awesome to behold. And I also thought at first that this game was going to be somewhat tedious because of the lifeblood. You have a lot of lifeblood or life points, but if you keep your character out in the open without taking cover, he's going to go down immediately. So that's really nice. It feels, as I was telling you, like a really fast and furious game. I highly recommend that you get into Wild West Exodus. They aren't releasing army books and such, so it encourages you to buy several different army boxes, because all the armies look cool. You have the warrior nation, and then you have you also have aliens. So you want to play cowboys versus aliens. This game is a good excuse for that. And as I was telling you, I'm going to put the link to the website below. This is one of the best skirmish games that I've seen, and This is my first experience playing a war game with a Wild West feel to it, but it's even more awesome because of the science, fantasy flavor of it. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.